I don't quite understand the question. We have 3 witnesses today. We have 2 coming in the second hour, Ms. Turnbull and Mr. Stedman, and then Mr. Conacher for an hour today. So it was an hour and an hour. The original intent and goal was to have 2 witnesses per hour, and it didn't end up that way. So we ended up like this. Okay, so that's how we ended up with it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think maybe just in future, it would be good to have all our witnesses have equal opportunity to speak at committee.
Okay. And they will. Certainly in the second hour they will. Mr. Seri, on the same point of order.
Yeah, same point. C'est par rapport parce que moi.
I understand that we don't split things by topic, but we have 3 witnesses here, and 1 witness is getting half of the time, and then the other 2 sharing the other half of the meeting. I was wondering why we didn't share the time more fairly between our witnesses. It's the same topic. It would have made sense if there were 2 separate topics, but it is the same topic for the 3 witnesses. So I wanted to know how this decision was made.
In the absence of any witness lists from any of the parties, we were working on the witness list from the analysts, and so the invitations went out. Mr. Conacher was available in this hour. Ms. Turnbull and Mr. Stedman were available in the second hour, and that's how it is difficult sometimes to manage and manipulate the way witnesses are going to appear, but this is the way it's happening today. So, and just a reminder again to all witnesses or to all parties that we need that witness list by today as well if you haven't sent it in. Okay, so we're going to start. Mr. Conacher, you have 5 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair and Committee, for the invitation and opportunity to testify on the Conflict of Interest Act, one of Canada's most important laws for ensuring democratic good government. I will make my presentation today mainly in English. Il faut que je pratique mon français beaucoup et il y a beaucoup de termes techniques.
I need to practice my French, and it's quite a technical topic.
I present mainly in English, but I welcome your questions in either language. Democracy Watch is Canada's leading democratic reform, government accountability, government ethics advocacy organization. We've been operating since 1993, 32 years this week, actually. And we have 41,000 supporters across the country. I'm also here representing the Government Ethics Coalition, a coalition of citizen groups pushing for ethics reforms. It's great that the committee is holding open hearings, unlike the secretive behind closed door hearings that another House committee held in 2022 to review the MP Ethics Code. Conservative MPs and Bloc MPs, you're asking some good questions, better questions about the Act than have been asked by MPs at this committee in the past 20 years. So it's great to see that. But you are still missing some key loopholes and flaws and not cutting through the obscurities and misleading haze about the Act that the Ethics Commissioner Conrad von Finkenstein creates whenever he talks about the Act. Hopefully, Liberal MPs on this committee, you will set aside your talking points and prepared questions that the Cabinet and Research Bureau have prepared for you and actually listen and think about the seriously unethical, undemocratic and bad government actions that are currently legal under the Conflict of Interest Act, and why long overdue changes need to be made to ensure democratic good government now and into the future. The Conflict of Interest Act and the related MP Code and Senate Ethics Code and the codes that apply to federal government employees are among the most important laws and codes for ensuring democratic good government. Unfortunately, and Democracy Watch's written submission to the committee will provide all of the details, section by section, the Conflict of Interest Act is a sad joke. That because of huge loopholes in the law, doesn't apply to 99% of the decisions and actions of the most powerful people in the government. It really should be called, because of these loopholes, the Conflict of Interest Act really should be called the almost impossible to be in a Conflict of Interest Act. The Conflict of Interest Act, which covers cabinet ministers, their staff, and top government officials, does not prevent, prohibit, or penalize conflicts of interest. So it's truly Orwellian. In fact, the Act is so full of loopholes that allow powerful politicians and public officials in the federal government to have secret investments, to secretly participate in decisions when they have a clear financial conflict of interest, and to secretly profit financially from their decisions. The Act is weaker than the rules for senators and federal government employees, and as weak as the rules for backbench MPs, which makes no sense at all. It is simply perverse that the most powerful politicians and office holders in Canada's federal government have much weaker ethics requirements and standards than the least powerful public servants. If you support the Conflict of Interest Act in its current form, and if you support the weak and in some cases dangerous proposals for amendments that the Ethics Commissioner von Finkenstein has put forward, if you support the Act in its current form or with these weak amendments, you support protecting private interests, you support politicians and public officials profiting financially from their decisions, and you support unethical and corrupt policymaking, all of which violates the public interest clearly. As the Globe and Mail put it in an editorial in June, a plan to make changes to make the Conflict of Interest Act actually effective is missing in action, MIA. The Conservatives made some promises in their election platform, but they were a bit vague and focused pretty much only on the Prime Minister's role and position. The Liberals bloc and NDP made no promises. The Globe's editorial also criticized the Ethics Commissioner's very limited recommendations in his annual report, which you've heard about from him. And in some cases, those recommendations, again, would weaken the law. Hopefully, instead of keeping this sad joke of a law that has done very little to clean up federal politics in the past 20 years, almost, all federal parties will work together and go beyond the Ethics Commissioner's mostly bad recommendations to finally close all the loopholes in all federal political ethics laws and codes and strengthen enforcement and penalties so politicians and their staff and top government officials are no longer allowed to make unethical, self-interested decisions or secretly profit from their decisions. I will now provide a quick summary of the dirty dozen loopholes in the Act, and similar loopholes exist in the MP Ethics Code and Senate Ethics Code, along with enforcement flaws. Again, Democracy Watch's written submission will provide all the details, including a link to my 900-page plus PhD thesis, which analyzed the Act and codes and other federal democracy laws and recommended key changes, in case you want even more details. I welcome your questions about anything concerning effective government ethics standards and enforcement after I briefly list the loopholes in enforcement. Rule requiring honesty.
I'm sorry, Mr. Conacher, we have 5 minutes, so we're over that time. I'm going to suggest if you wanted to in your brief, or if it comes up in questioning, you can refer to that, but I'm going to have to stop you there.
Okay, that's fine.
Because we're going to start with our first round of questioning, and I apologize for that, sir, but we want to get to questions. Mr. Cooper, you have 6 minutes. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Conacher, Mr. Carney's ethics disclosure states that he is entitled to carried interest payments, a.k.a. future bonus pay, in respect of the performance of Brookfield's global transition funds, in which he co-led efforts to raise billions of dollars of capital for. But what is missing from Mr. Carney's disclosure are the holdings in this fund, the companies that this fund is invested in. Would you agree that this is a significant and material omission from the standpoint of knowing the extent of Mr. Carney's conflicts of interest?
Yes, and unfortunately, though, the disclosure rules allow for secret investments, essentially. The details are not provided.
It's a material omission, would you agree? Because Mr. Carney handpicked the holdings in the companies that the fund is invested in, and therefore the companies his future performance pay worth potentially tens of millions of dollars is tied to, correct?
Yes, so when you have these kind of general funds, which again, it's legal to invest in some of them and keep it secret, some types of mutual funds, the details of what you're actually invested in is known to you, but not disclosed to the public.
So Mr. Carney therefore knows which public policy decisions will impact these holdings, which in turn impacts the future performance of the fund, which in turn affects the value of his future bonus pay. Meanwhile, Canadians are left in the dark. So Mr. Carney, as it pertains to his future bonus pay, is hiding his conflicts of interest from Canadians, isn't he?
Yes, again, that's legal to do, and what's even worse, because of another, the biggest loophole in the Act, he is allowed to participate in decisions 99% of the time that affect his investments, because the definition of private interest in the Act says that you are not in a conflict, and the Act does not apply when you are dealing with a matter that applies generally. And 99% of decisions that Prime Minister and Cabinet Ministers and top government officials make apply generally. And so the Act only applies 1% of the time to very specific decisions. And as a result, it's almost impossible to be in a conflict of interest under this Act.
And I agree with you on that point. But to be clear, just with respect to disclosure, there's nothing that prevents Mr. Carney from disclosing the companies and the holdings of these funds, is there? If he wanted to be transparent, he could simply disclose that information to Canadians?
Of course, you can always go beyond what's required in terms of disclosure and also compliance.
But Mr. Carney, of course, hasn't been transparent. Now, the Global Transition Funds is listed in Mr. Carney's so-called ethics screen, but given that the holdings and the companies that the fund is invested in and in which Mr. Carney's future performance pay is tied to have not been disclosed by Mr. Carney, how possibly can the ethics screen function to screen out Mr. Carney for making decisions where he has conflicts of interest?
Well, the ethics screen never works because, again, of this huge loophole. So ethics screens are a smoke screen that actually violate the law because the Act requires disclosure whenever you recuse yourself, step aside from participating in a decision, discussion, or vote. And the ethics screen allow you to not do that. So you're violating the law, and what's hidden is that, in fact, you're participating 99% of the time in decisions that affect your investments because of this huge loophole, again, that you do not have to step aside when you're dealing with a matter that applies generally. And again, 99% of decisions apply generally. So the screens are a smoke screen that hide conflicts of interest. They do not stop them or prevent them in any way.
And do you have concerns with the fact that this screen is basically set up on the basis of just trust the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, the clerk and the Clerk of the Privy Council? Just trust them, even though they answer to the Prime Minister, that they serve at the pleasure of the Prime Minister?
Yes, very much so. Anyone who's serving at your pleasure is not independent. And I was very disappointed to hear Ethics Commissioner Conrad von Finkenstein claim that they share the same interest as the Prime Minister in terms of keeping him away from conflicts of interest. Actually, the interest they share with the Prime Minister is covering up conflicts of interest. And these ethics screens, again, were created by the Ethics Commissioner. It's a loophole that's not in the Act. It's created by the Commissioner. And tomorrow, Conrad von Finkenstein could require full transparency under that ethics screen of every single time that Mr. Carney is actually stepping aside from a decision. And he could just impose that as part of the conditions of the screen. It's really his screen. He sets the terms of it. And what it would show, if there was transparency, is that 99% of the time, Mr. Carney is participating in decisions that affect his financial interests because the law allows for that, as the Ethics Commissioner acknowledged when he was testifying.
Now, Mr. Carney has said, well, there's nothing to see here. Everything is on the up and up because I've put my assets into a blind trust. But when we look, for example, at the funds in which he has future bonus pay awaiting for him, what good is a blind trust when the Prime Minister is hardly blind to policy decisions that will impact upon his future bonus pay?
Very, very quick response.
Yeah,
please.
blind trusts are not blind at all. You choose the trustee. You also can give them initial instructions. They can give you regular updates, and you know what you put in the blind trust. But even further for Prime Minister Carney, the holdings are actually outside the blind trust. All the Brookfield conglomerate, the 103 companies, he knows that he owns them. He knows that he owns stock options in Brookfield until 2033. So he knows he's in a financial conflict of interest, and there's nothing preventing or prohibiting or penalizing it.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Church, starting for 6 minutes, and I understand you're
get a lot of media coverage. If there's a scandal that grips the public's attention, there's a sense that there must be something wrong in the rules. Or there's some loophole that needs to be closed. Sometimes when there's smoke, there's fire. Not always. All public office holders have their own personal circumstances that interact with the ethics regime in unique ways. Some people have fairly straightforward financial portfolios and likely wouldn't need an ethical screen even if they held the highest public office. Other people have significant financial holdings, or they have had leadership roles in the private sector, which could result in the need for a more in-depth effort to separate out their public responsibilities and the private interests. Others still have relationships, as opposed to financial circumstances, that give rise to a sense of conflict of interest or potential impropriety of some kind. We tend to focus on finance when we talk about conflict of interest, but sometimes social circumstances can also cause the public to be concerned about whether or not people are acting appropriately. I'm going to try in a couple of minutes to address some of the issues that the committee has been talking about in recent days. First, I think I understand the concern about blind trusts. The problem, I think, is that the public office holder is not completely blind. You know what you own when the thing goes into a blind trust. The public is blind, though, because the specific circumstances of blind trusts and ethical screens are not available to them. They get the general, they don't get the specific. There are trade-offs, obviously, between the public's right to know and the individual's right to privacy when it comes to their financial holdings and that of their family. It's not a small thing. Overreach with respect to disclosure and asset management could deter some people from holding public office. I think that's important. I don't gloss over that. I think it's very important. It is important to remember that ethics regimes exist to enable people's participation in politics, not to make it impossible, not to make it undesirable. Political access to political office, as you know better than I do, is important. We want to make sure that that's real. Questions have been raised about whether ethics rules should apply to leadership candidates. Leadership contests are run by political parties for the most part, as you know, with Elections Canada having an oversight role when it comes to the flow of money, because there's limits about what you can give, how much you can give, and who can give. Fine. In other words, this is not the Wild West. It's not totally lawless. I think that to expect leadership candidates to disclose their assets would be to place an undue burden on candidates who at that point are private citizens, unless they are elected or were members of cabinet already, in which case they are subject already to an ethics regime. But as private citizens and as candidates alone, they have no power. They're not making decisions on behalf of the public. They're not directing finances. They're not doing any of that. So disclosure requirements at that point would have no public purpose and serve no public value. However, if you're looking for a loophole, and just if that's the case, this sort of thing doesn't keep me awake at night. But if it does, there might be a loophole here, given the fact that opposition party leaders are not subject to an ethics regime in the event that they are not part of the executive. So if somebody is running for a leader of an opposition party, they win. If you're not the government, you're not subject to the Conflict of Interest Act. And so, to the extent that you want to worry about perhaps this person might become prime minister soon in the event that there is a defeat of the government and then there's a replacement by a new person, maybe that's a loophole. But yet the person would be subject to the Conflict of Interest Act in the event that they become a member of the executive. So I'm not stressed out about any of that. I'm going to stop because that's my 5 minutes.
Thank you, Ms. Turnbull, and it avoids me from stopping you, so I appreciate that. It's the worst job in the world when it comes to, especially when you're saying something as interesting as you are, and Mr. Stedman. I hate doing it, but I have to stay on time. Mr. Cooper, you're going to start us in the first 6-minute round. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Professor Stedman, I want to ask you some questions about the Prime Minister's so-called ethics screen. This so-called ethics screen encompasses 103 different companies, including Brookfield, companies that engage in everything from energy to ports to transport to infrastructure to fishing, you name it. These companies are involved in all manner of activities that touch upon federal public policy and decisions that the Prime Minister could be involved in making. Are you aware of any ethics screen that has been put in place that is as vast as the one put in place in respect of Mr. Carney, given the vast number of potential conflicts of interest that he is involved in?
The easy answer, no. There's no way I've ever heard of anything quite this broad.
Thank you. This so-called ethics screen is being administered by the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff and the Clerk of the Privy Council. Given the large number of companies captured by the screen and the large number of potential conflicts of interest involving Mr. Carney, do you have any concerns about the practicability on a day-to-day basis of these two very busy people properly and effectively screening out conflicts of interest from the Prime Minister?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've been quoted on this several times when the election was happening. I have no idea how they're going to be able to screen for all of these things and continue to do their job at the same time. I wonder if there's some sort of automated process that they have in place. I've said several times it would be nice to know more about how they're going to operationalize this actual screen. I don't think that we have any information about how they are actually managing to do this.
No transparency. And pursuant to the ethics screen, just to be clear, Mr. Carney may still participate in discussions and make decisions affecting these 103 companies on most matters, even where he stands to personally and financially benefit. Isn't that right?
That's correct. It's the disproportionate clause that comes into his screen that I've also commented on as being unique and something that we should learn more about. And I think that came up with your previous witness, too.
And speaking of the disproportionate clause, that is language that is not found in the Conflict of Interest Act, is it?
It is not in the Act, nope.
And it's not defined in the ethics screen, is it?
Not in the screen, no. It's the kind of thing that the trustees are, I suppose, supposed to figure out. It would be nice to know how they've defined it so that we could, as a public that's interested in knowing more, also
really going to be
play along.
It's going to be really left to the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff and the Clerk of the Privy Council to interpret on a case-by-case basis whether there is a disproportionate interest or not. Is that right?
That's my understanding, absolutely, yeah.
And so here we have an ethics screen that is unprecedented in scope, administered by two of the busiest people in government, making decisions as to what the Prime Minister sees and what he doesn't see based upon an ambiguous proportionality standard. In the face of all of that, what assurance do Canadians have that the so-called ethics screen is working?
Trust and faith. I'm not sure you have any sort of documented assurance in any way whatsoever. You just have to hope that we put someone in public office who acts with integrity at this point.
And so, just to pick up on that, you can't point to any tangible proof, documents, disclosure, public filings that would prove to Canadians that the screen is working. That just doesn't exist. There are no chances.
There's no evidence to suggest, that we have no evidence demonstrating that there's actually been a decision made with respect to the screen, period. It's just not something that there's a public, reporting mechanism for.
Now, can you understand why Canadians would be skeptical about the effectiveness of the screen in light of all of the issues that you have identified, coupled with the fact that it is being administered by two people who answer to and are beholden to the Prime Minister, including his Chief of Staff?
I am equally skeptical. So, yes, I can understand why the public would be.
Now, you spoke about transparency, the need for the Prime Minister to, at the very least, be transparent about how the ethics screen is working on a day-to-day basis. Am I correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And we've seen really no transparency. Is that fair?
That's fair.
And the Prime Minister just on the weekend met with investment leaders and business leaders in London and in New York. When he was asked, who did he meet with? What companies did they represent? He didn't provide an answer. So we don't know if these companies are connected to Brookfield or any of the other companies that are subject to the screen. We don't know anything about what those discussions are. Should Canadians be concerned about the Prime Minister not coming forward and disclosing that information? Shouldn't he?
There's no obligation to. The question is whether there should be a moral standard to do so. There's no legal standard to do so. It does raise the question of whether or not we could go back and meet with the commissioner and talk about whether this screen is robust enough and has enough detail in it about how it should be implemented.
In the interest of transparency, you spoke about transparency. I would submit, consistent with that, it would be the proper and correct thing to do for the Prime Minister to disclose that, wouldn't it be? That would be consistent with being transparent.
There's a moral argument to be made. I agree.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Cooper. We have prochaine intervention et pour
We have Mr. Sari next for 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Dr. Turnbull. Thank you for your testimony. It was very interesting. Thank you to Dr. Sidman as well. I would like for us to talk about this total independence. Institutions need to have that real independence, the ability to
Jurisdictions, including within Canada, sometimes at the provincial level, sometimes there is, you can have another person who is an agent of Parliament who is appointed on a kind of similar, the person is nonpartisan, the person holds certain credentials, whether they're a judge, whatever, and they might meet the credentials for another appointment as well. They can hold over for a period of time while you choose someone. We can do something like that. I wouldn't want to put a whole lot of emphasis on that and treat that too much as a solution in the event that this position is vacant. I think that the Ethics Commissioner holds a very important and specific role when it comes to judgment about how these sorts of matters are going to be dealt with, especially because it's not the law. Right? Like sometimes we look at the importance of having a judge in this kind of role, but this is not about deciding whether there's a legal threshold has been met. It's about judgment. It's about public trust. It's much more nuanced. And so I think that the choice of who plays this role is very important.
Dans vos travaux universitaires, vous...
In your university work, you talked about a robust application system for ethics. What do you think of the Conflict of Interest Act that we have currently in 2025? Do you have any suggestions for improvements?
Sure. Like I don't necessarily think that including a whole bunch of things in the act that aren't there already is going to solve all the problems. And I admit that when I was younger, when I started in all of this, and I wrote my PhD dissertation on conflict of interest and ethics regimes for members of Parliament, I think I really felt then that the more things that were enumerated, the more ethical everybody would be. And now I know that's wrong. Now I know that actually there's not much you can do to force somebody to do what they're not inclined to do. You can't force someone to be ethical. You can't force someone to make the kinds of decisions that the public is going to trust. It's a judgment call on that person's part. Of course, there are things like bribery, fraud, breach of trust that are in the conflict, that are in the criminal code. That's a different level. But ethics is specifically a kind of non-legal but very important space in the relationship between elected officials and the public.
J'ai une question.
I asked a question to the previous witness, and I would like to ask it to you. Eliminating the appearance of a conflict of interest, is this a goal that is attainable? If we want to have an ethics code, are we democratically open then to Canadians?
And the kinds of things that he did, the kinds of offices he held, and a little bit of information about what his financial holdings look like, and now he's had to put that in, kind of put that in public in a certain way. I don't necessarily know. I don't know that the ethics regime is not able to handle that. His case is unusual, yes, and the kinds of holdings he has, the kinds of positions he's held, of course those things are unusual. I suspect that's probably what contributed to his political success in the first place. But he's an unusual case where he's got a much longer list of things he has to recuse himself from, put up a screen about, put in a blind trust. He's in a bit of an unusual case. But the point of the ethics regime is to be able to enable his participation, as is anybody else who has been successful in the private sector.
Mais est-ce que c'est suffisant? Parce que
But is it enough? Because some experts have told us, for general application, there is no issue with the perception of conflict of interest or real conflict of interest. Is it enough? What should we do?
We think it's not enough. I mean, if the public has an issue with it, they'll let people know. I don't get the sense personally that there's a widespread sense that the Prime Minister is in public office for the wrong reason. If he really cared about money all that much, I suspect he would have stayed in the private sector. I suspect he's leaving money on the table by being in the role he's in.
Bon, c'est pas une question.
I haven't named him. I'm trying to talk about this as an objective case. But being a prime minister should require more than an average minister or member of parliament. It's easy for us to see a situation of a conflict of interest for an MP. They're not making decisions on behalf of the country, meeting with lobbyists throughout the world. And so should there not be even more transparency because this case is so particular? There's a difference between an MP, a minister, and a prime minister. Even in a situation where there's recusal, is it enough? What could we do? What more could we do? I know we could always talk about intentions and play politics with ethics, but I want us to do the opposite. And I need to know what we need to do. You seem to be saying that we won't be able to succeed, but I don't think the current legislation is enough. The proof is in the situation that we're seeing now, and it's beyond us.
Monsieur Thériault, les 6 minutes sont...
Monsieur Thériault, your 6 minutes are up. Perhaps we can come back to this at your next turn. I did ask a question.
Very brief response, Ms. Turnbull. I would appreciate that. Very brief.
Create ethics rules around individuals. Ever. That's not the point.
Okay. Thank you. That completes our first round. Je m'excuse, Monsieur Thériault, mais c'est 6 minutes.
Apologies, Mr. Thériault. You did have a little bit more time.
Monsieur Hardy pour 5 minutes.
Mr. Hardy, you have 5 minutes for the second round. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Professor Stedman and Dr. Turnbull. I'd like to come back to what my colleague was saying. In an answer, you mentioned that, and we're talking about the current case, that the Prime Minister should have just invested in the private sector. It would have been more beneficial for him than to come into the public sector. So that's in the case of somebody wanting to bring their knowledge and benefit their country. But could there be a potential case where the person knows that a lot of people will be losing money and our legislation is not able to deal with a situation like that? Is that something that could cause us some trouble if that were the case?
Sorry, what do you mean by a lot of people losing money?
Si, exemple, dans le cas...
For example, if it's somebody who manages portfolios and knowing that a government is going to fall, they say, well, we need someone to protect our interests. Could that be a case that would be problematic because our legislation would not be able to counter such a case?
I want to make sure I understand your question. Do you mean somebody who the Prime Minister would be thinking of in terms of their private interests?
On pourrait voir les intérêts privés. Parce que dans le cas que vous présentez...
In the case that you mentioned, you're talking about someone who wants to be Prime Minister, that they will be doing it with good intentions to make the country better. But could there not be a case where a person would be coming into politics not necessarily to make the country better, but to ensure that the people that they have business with don't lose money, and then they would be well positioned to do so, and that would put our country in peril a little bit?
So I think what we have to guard against that is disclosure. We do have, even though we don't necessarily require people to enumerate the exact dollar amounts of the stocks they hold, we don't necessarily get the nitty-gritty on everything. We do have a broad picture of what what kinds of affiliations the person's had, where they worked before. And that way the public has a way to say, look, you know, it looks like this person is acting in the interests of a certain group, and we don't want that. And so that would create a political backlash.
Dans cette situation-là, où est-ce qu'on sait, exemple, que
Well, we know that the Prime Minister is meeting with people, but isn't telling us who he's meeting with, knowing that it could be a conflict of interest. Now, the Prime Minister does not have to share his holdings, and I agree with you, you've mentioned the public opinion. Our democracy is struggling because people do not trust our institutions. And so we need to do everything that we can to rebuild that trust. And I think that we should have access to this information. In the current case that we're looking at, last week or 2 weeks ago, the Prime Minister was meeting with people, and it was a potential conflict of interest, but he didn't have to share it.
Point. And it's not, in that case, it's not so much about what's in the Prime Minister's blind trust or ethics screen. It's about who he's talking to and what conversations he might be having, and whether he has more pull with those people and that sort of thing. And so I think it'd be interesting to be clear about what sort of offense we think that person might be engaging in that context, right? Like, if he's talking to people who, so what? Like, what offense do you think he's, like, what possible bad thing could be happening?
on est d'accord ici qu'on doit clarifier ça.
We need to be able to clarify so that Canadians understand when it becomes a conflict, and we need safeguards that are clear in order to rebuild trust. Do you agree with that?
If in the event, for example, that the Prime Minister was having conversations with people with corporate entities that he had relationships with, and from an ethics perspective, the public has an interest in making sure that a public office holder doesn't do anything that benefits himself or benefits his friends or that sort of thing. And so the public would have an interest in knowing, is there any conversation that the Prime Minister is having that would somehow confer some unfair benefit on people he knows or he's worked with before? So it's important then for him to be transparent about who he's meeting with.
On est d'accord sur le fait qu'il devrait être transparent, il devrait dire ses avoirs.
I agree that he should be transparent and share his holdings and state who he's meeting with. We agree there. Now, brief question. I think that it was Dr. Stedman who mentioned, or Professor Stedman, who talked about candidates. Should there be an ethical screen when you apply to be a candidate instead of waiting until later? So if you want to apply, here are the standards. Here's the ethical code that you need to respect before you put your face on a...
Please. Thank you. Okay. Mr. Saini, you're up next, sir, for 5 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Professor Turnbull, a lot has been talked about people not having faith in politicians. When we had the election 6 months ago, we had 4 leaders running.
I have to interrupt right now because what you're about to see is as bad as it gets. I understand a lot of my audience could be on the senior side. If you get to this point, cut it off. Like, this is a joke right here. Garbrooke Sani, oh, give it up. Watch.
For the office. Everybody knew what they were doing, what their interest is, how wealthy they are. Why would we now have an issue when Canadians overwhelmingly elected a person who they thought was fit to run the government?
So, sorry, are you talking about the Liberal leadership race? There were 4 candidates ultimately, and
the Prime Ministership after the election.
Sorry. I'm so sorry. Can you ask me the question again? Yes, I thought you were talking about the Liberal leadership.
No. My question is that a lot has been talked that people don't have faith in our politicians. I am saying there were 4 people running to be the Prime Minister of the country. People know their background. People know how wealthy they are. They still went with a person they thought was the best to lead the country. Is there anything wrong with that?
Of course not. And people are going to vote the way they're going to vote. At the end of the day, I found in my own research about ethics and people's sense of what's ethical and what's not, it's not the things that I thought would bother people that actually bother them. Sometimes it's things like perks that politicians get that they don't. The fact that politicians at the end of the day get a taxi chit to get home, they don't get that. The fact that politicians have meals comp for them, they don't get that, even though they're struggling financially. The sorts of the sorts of ethical questions that sometimes the public have in their mind doesn't necessarily match up with the big conflict of interest questions that we're talking about today, even though those things are important. I am not convinced that the public is concerned heavily about the conflict of interest potential or the ethical holdings or the financial holdings of any of the party leaders.
Thank you. In your opinion, how can our government ensure that the conflict of interest and ethics commissioner offices have the necessary independence and resources to effectively hold public office accountable?
I don't think that there's necessarily a high public awareness about the role of the ethics commissioner and the way that that office works. I strongly doubt that. I've never seen any evidence to suggest that the public is acutely aware of what the conflict of interest and ethics commissioner does. I think the public becomes more aware when there's a scandal, when there's a lot of media coverage around something. I think that to the extent that people start to ask questions about the conflict of interest and ethics commissioner and the appointment, it's important, I think, to show that there are specific credentials that that person should hold. It's not a political appointment. It's not something that the Prime Minister just says, okay, this is my friend and I trust that person and so they're going to be the ethics commissioner. There's a sense in which there is an actual set of credentials the person has to meet, and then they're judged against those things. I think that's probably what the public would see as trying to create, if they were trying to create a trust relationship with a commissioner, that's what it would be based on.
If there was a scandal, that there will be legal implication, there will be legal charges. So I don't believe what we are trying to accomplish has any conflict with that.
If there was a scandal and there were legal charges, do you mean under the Conflict of Interest Act?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes it's a strange thing for the public, because, again, to the extent that they're leaning into it at all, if the response, if you're talking about something that's so bad that it engages the criminal code, you're talking bribery, people paid attention. The last time there was a senator who was charged with a whole bunch of counts of, he wasn't found guilty of anything, but when it meets that kind of threshold for that kind of charge, the public pays attention. When there's something under the Conflict of Interest Act that's going, even if it's the worst case scenario, it's going to be reacted with an administrative monetary penalty, the public is not going to be super stressed out about that. And to the extent that they even know about it, they find out that somebody forgot to disclose their French villa, and so they were charged $250. That makes the whole thing look ridiculous. I don't think that administrative monetary penalties are the way to make the public think that politicians are ethical. Okay. It's a weird space.
Thank you, Ms. Turnbull. Thank you, Mr. Sani. Monsieur Thériault, 5 minutes.
You have 5 minutes. Great. My questions will be for Professor Stedman. I figure you've been hearing me ask questions, and so you know what I'm interested in. You mentioned a case, and not everybody realizes or recognizes that this is a particular case. And one might think that the ethics screen is sufficient and that situations would be resolved by simply saying there is no conflict of interest or appearance of a conflict of interest when it's a situation of general application. Do you agree that there is no conflict of interest conflict of interest or appearance of conflict of interest when we're talking about general application for the Prime Minister. I'm not talking about a simple minister here, but for a Prime Minister. Do you agree?
No, the general application rule doesn't eliminate the very fact of a conflict of interest. It is a decision that the lawmakers have made with respect to where they want to draw the line of best fit between eliminating conflicts and not disincentivizing public service. Your only way, as was mentioned earlier, to eliminate conflicts entirely is to just not have assets that could put you in conflict. There's no other way. So a screen, to come back to the screens, screens are interesting, right? We've never seen anything with this breadth before. I think what we need to do is learn from it. I think what we need to do is, in a very open way, say what's working. How do we make a screen like this work? This is a unique circumstance. Is there something we can do in the act to improve it so that screens like this make sense and actually give the public confidence that they're useful? I think that's the question, and that's the conversation we need to have, is how to make screens make sense at this level.
What do we currently know about this screen? We've been talking about this ethics screen that was negotiated with the Prime Minister. What do we know about it other than those who are responsible for its application? Do you believe that it is transparent enough?
I think one of the things that we can learn here is that we should be learning as we go with respect to this screen. There should be an ongoing conversation about how it works and how that proportionality clause is going to be operationalized. Because what I really do believe is that if we understand how this screen works, we can update the act to include standards that are higher for screens. With respect to public reporting, maybe, which is, I think, the thing that everyone's getting at here is there's no public reporting that's part of this screen. Maybe we want some of that. But I think maybe we also want to put into words the proportionality bit, because that is the counterbalance to the general application rule, right?
Étant donné que ce sont des gens qui...
Given that these are subordinates to the Prime Minister and they have to manage the application of this screen, do you not believe that there should be a review done by an external reviewer or supervisor that would come from the Commissioner's office? And we wouldn't have to require the use of the Ethics Commissioner, but to have ongoing reviews instead of only when a case occurs. Would that not ensure more transparency? Because currently the people applying the screen are subordinates. And so we don't even know if they are in a situation of a conflict of interest.
I think that point is very well taken. I think you would get some resistance to the idea of someone external to the Prime Minister's dealings being able to provide oversight, because there are going to be interactions that are confidential and that must necessarily stay so. And so there is a level of trust we have to put in the people who are responsible for the screen. But I do think you're absolutely right to point out that being subordinate to the Prime Minister means that you are in a conflict of interest. You care about his interests in as much as you care about the public interest, because, you sit at his pleasure. There's no way to avoid that. You could have part or at least some sense of reporting back into the Commissioner's office on an ongoing basis. And that may have to go through the Commissioner themselves as opposed to through someone delegated by the Commissioner.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Stedman. Merci, M. Thériault. Mr. Cooper for 5, suivi par Madame Lapointe pour 5. Go ahead, Mike.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Recently, the Prime Minister, our jet-setting Prime Minister, in his trips to New York City and London, England, met with several prominent business as well as investment leaders. When he was asked on the weekend who he met with, the Prime Minister refused to say. He refused to be transparent. He merely said he met with, quote, investment-type investors, close quote. Quote, people who have global capital, close quote. And then he said, we'll need significant capital in respect of certain unnamed and unspecified projects. Now, we know that there has never been a prime minister with more potential conflicts of interest than this prime minister. We have never had a prime minister with an ethics screen as vast as the one that is imposed on this prime minister in light of those multitude of potential conflicts of interest. And we know that this so-called ethics screen has no mechanisms to ensure that there are checks and balances to see that it in fact is being triggered when it ought to be. Instead, we are left to simply trust the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff and the Clerk of the Privy Council, who serve at the pleasure of the Prime Minister and answer to the Prime Minister, and who are therefore not independent. That simply isn't good enough to simply say we're going to trust them, because, frankly, we don't know whether the ethics screen should have been triggered. We don't know if what was discussed, whether the Prime Minister stands in any way to personally benefit from any discussions, any decisions that might be in the process of being made arising from the discussions that he had in London and New York. And we know that despite the fact that the Prime Minister is subject to this ethics screen, he may make decisions that he stands to personally benefit from. I say at the very least, well, that's unacceptable, and there needs to be, in the face of that, at the very least, some level of transparency. Canadians deserve to know who the Prime Minister is meeting with, why he was meeting with them, and they need to have the assurance that this very flimsy ethics screen is, at the very least, being triggered when it ought to be. And the Prime Minister has provided no answers to any of those questions. And so with that, I would put on notice the following motion, that having regard for the fact that the Prime Minister met with several business as well as investment leaders in his recent trips to New York City, New York, and London, England, and the Prime Minister has refused to disclose which individuals and or entities he met with during those trips, and is subject, pursuant to the Conflict of Interest Act, to an ethics screen intended to prevent him from making decisions related to 103 companies that would place him in a conflict of interest, the committee order from the Prime Minister's office production of records which comprehensively list each individual and, if applicable, the name of which entity, corporation, organization, and or agency they represented and their job title that was present in a meeting with the Prime Minister, the time and date at which those meetings took place, and what was discussed in those meetings from and including September 21, 2025 to and including September 28, 2025, and that these records be deposited with the clerk of the committee in both official languages no later than 1 week following the adoption of this motion.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Cooper. So you're putting that motion on notice. I'm going to ask that you distribute that to the clerk in both official languages so that it can be redistributed to all members of the committee. Thank you, Mr. Cooper. You still have 20 seconds left. Are you done? Okay. Madame Lapointe, pour 5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci. Questioning, Mr. Kelly for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to officials for attending today. The Parliamentary Budget Officer has just released a damning report, and he delivered some fairly shocking testimony last week at the Government Operations Committee. Now, this bill, which is titled as an affordability measure for Canadians, but Canadians face a staggeringly high cost of living, fueled by inflation that are triggered by deficits. Can I confirm then, if the department agrees with the parliamentary budget officer, the affordability measures here boil down to something under $200 a year per Canadian family? Is that correct?
Hi, thanks for the question. I can speak to tax savings related to the reduction in the first personal income tax rate, which could be as high as $420 in 2026 or about half that in 2025. So that's potential savings from that measure.
Okay, that is if I understood you correctly, I think you said that's the absolute maximum savings.
That would be the maximum.
Okay,
yeah.
so my question was a more typical or an average savings that an average Canadian would see would be under $200.
Right. So for that, when it comes to a tax rate reduction, it will really depend on the individual's circumstances, and that is specifically their level of taxable income, and also what non-refundable tax credits they claim, which already reduce tax owing.
The PBO had this pegged at under $200 as an average amount. I think 190 was the number, if I understand. Is that correct? Does that sound correct to you?
Like I said, it really depends on individual circumstances. Like on average, I mean, it depends on your claims of non-refundable tax credits, your average taxable income. So I can't speak to whether or not the PBO's numbers are accurate.
All right. The tax fairness for Canadians relies on every taxpayer paying that which they owe under law. Is that does the department agree with that? That all taxpayers must pay what they owe?
I mean, I think as a general statement, yes. I mean, we agree that
Okay.
under the law.
So offshore tax filers have had enormous advantages in the tax system. There was a damning Auditor General report almost 6 years ago that pointed out that the department often gave months or even years for offshore filers to comply with requests for information, where a Canadian tax filer would automatically be assessed their the full amount owed whenever there was a request for information that wasn't complied with in 30 days. Is that still the practice at the CRA?
I mean, I'm at the Department of Finance, so I can't really speak to the CRA's practice. I don't know if one of my
perhaps
colleagues
the CRA
here can,
officials that
but,
are here could comment on that.
I think so.
20 minutes.
I think the question is how information requests are treated for non-residents versus Canadian residents. So I think, I mean, under the law, there's no different law for someone who's offshore versus.
Okay, well, the Auditor General identified that the practice of the CRA was to give additional time for compliance, months or years. In fact, often writing off or just rescinding a request for information when dealing with a complex offshore filer, whereas a domestic filer with a simple return, if they don't give the information that's requested by CRA, the CRA would just assess the tax amount in question. So is that still the current practice of the CRA?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. Although the question does not relate to Bill C4 or its provisions, I can confirm that the CRA has addressed the recommendations of the Auditor General, and we have clarified the timelines for information requests for non-residents.
All right. I'd like perhaps if you could get back to the committee and if you've got any way that we can show and document how the timelines have changed since that Auditor General's report. But I want to get back to C4. C4 is an affordability measure, and as I said, tax fairness is important to Canadians. Individual Canadians pay a lot of income tax and expect tax fairness. So we have seen the use of tax havens by businesses, including Brookfield, the company that the Prime Minister until recently chaired, which set up offshore tax funds in offshore tax havens, Bermuda, the Cayman Islands. And will the tax collection measures of this government capture these offshore filers and ensure that businesses are not able to avoid paying Canadian taxes?
So, Mr. Chair, there's nothing in this bill that speaks to offshore taxes or to collections. I mean, the Department of Finance has that is something that we, are continuously working on. There have been measures announced in recent.
Second round, and first we have Mrs. Kobina. 5 minutes.
Can you tell the committee how many homes have been built in Canada over the last 12 months?
Off the top of my head, I don't know. I'm assuming it's in the high 200,000s.
Sorry, how many?
Off the top of my head, it typically runs somewhere between 200,000 and the high 200,000s in a given year. I don't know what the specific number is for this last 12 months.
Just in the past 12 months.
Like I said, I don't have the specific figure for the past 12
problem.
months, but generally it's around, let's say, 250,000 per year.
Okay. And of these new homes built, how many are less than $1 million and being purchased by first-time home buyers?
So I have a chart for that. Okay, so we're not looking at the 250,000, just so you know, because a certain portion of housing starts are purpose-built rental units, and those aren't included in the calculation for purposes of this rebate.
Okay.
But among the ones that are, actually, I don't have the total here. I can get that to you, but the idea is 97% or so are under $1 million, and 3% are between $1 million and $1.5 million.
And given that the homes above $1 million are not eligible for the 100% GST rebate, would you agree then that the majority of the first-time home buyers in large urban centers like Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal would actually not benefit from this rebate?
No, I don't think that's true. First-time home buyers in Vancouver and Toronto, they might not be buying single-family homes. They're probably buying condos, newly built condos, when they're buying a newly built home. So in general, even first-time home buyers in the more expensive markets are expected to benefit from the rebate.
Okay, so has there been a statistically measurable increase in housing starts that can be attributed directly to the GST rebate policy?
We don't have figures like that, and the reason is because when you introduce a measure like this amongst many other measures that are being introduced, not just tax measures, but other types of federal measures, and not just at the federal level, but you've also got measures being introduced at the provincial and municipal levels. And then you've got a variety of factors that have nothing to do with the government at all, such as interest rates, economic conditions, the availability of labor, cost of inputs, et cetera. Those all impact housing prices, and of course, in turn, those impact demand. So it's very difficult, if not impossible, to put a precise estimate on the number of new builds that will be created as a result of this one singular measure. However, directionally, we expect it to increase demand for new homes by first-time home buyers, which that increased demand, if those new home buyers are encouraged to buy a new home rather than an older home, for example, that has no GST on it, would be expected to generate a supply response from builders.
Mm-hmm. So on the flip side, has there been any observable reduction in the average home prices or rents since this rebate was introduced?
We wouldn't expect a reduction in the price of homes as a result of this rebate, because the rebate is claimed directly by the purchaser of the home. And like I said, the purchaser doesn't even have to disclose that they're a first-time home buyer to the builder. So the builder is going to charge what the builder is going to charge, whatever the market price will bear, whatever the market will bear, and then they can either assign that rebate to the builder and have it reflected in the contract, or they'll be able to claim it directly with the CRA.
Thank you. Can you confirm whether the CRA can legally administer or apply a tax change before Parliament has passed the enabling legislation?
I'd like to defer that to my CRA colleagues.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you. So as mentioned previously, in the case of a rebate or a refund, the CRA must wait for royal assent of the enabling legislation. And so the CRA is not able to speak to the impact of the measure nor speak to its application since it is still being considered by Parliament.
In the case of the digital sales tax, the CRA began collecting the tax before the legislation received royal assent. Can you confirm that the government later had to refund those collections because the law wasn't yet in force?
10-second answer, please.
10 seconds. So refunds require royal assent, and so those have not taken place.
All right, gang, we're going to wrap it up right there. Aaron, Canadian Looney, what a mess. Like, a lot was exposed this evening on Mark Carney. It seemed that way to me. We're kicking the rest of the evening off this way.
You should do exercises. That's important to our good health. And friends, tomorrow we are going to be visiting with a fisherman who will tell us about his very enjoyable hobby. Now, I would like to see you all through our magic mirror. Romper bumper, stomper boo, tell me, do. Magic mirror, please tell me today, did all of my friends have fun at play? I see all of my friends in Alberta. It's nice to see you. And I see Dan and Vivian. I see Marlon and Mona. I see Catherine and Harley. I see Anne and Elizabeth and Jane. I see Bert and Nicole, and I see you too. I hope to see you tomorrow, right here in Romper Room.
Ding dong, knock knock, hey daddy do. Bing bong, tick tock, bebop boom.
Kick off your weekend with exciting CFL action when the Edmonton Eskimos tackle the BC Lions in Vancouver. Tomorrow night at 10:30 on CFTO TV.